news tonight. The Lebanese Prime Minister threatens to resign, warning rival parties and his unity cabinet that the state is going towards collapse and calls on them to stand up their responsibilities. Iran and Britain reciprocate the restoration of diplomatic ties with the reopening of the British Embassy in Tehran and the Iranian Embassy in London at the charge d'affaires level. And 1 million North Koreans signed petitions to join or rejoin the army after the two Koreans exchanged fire and declared a quasi-state of war in frontline areas. We begin with Lebanon, where demonstrations continued for the second day today against the government of Tamam Salam, who has threatened to resign, warning rival parties in his unity cabinet the state is going towards collapse. In a televised address today, Salam called on officials and political forces to stand up their responsibility. He said that if a cabinet meeting scheduled for next Thursday was not productive on issues including a tender to decide on a new refuse collection company, there would be no necessity for the government after all. He also described the force used against protesters yesterday as excessive and said those responsible will be held accountable. Protesters today called for a second day of demonstrations against the government after at least 35 people were injured yesterday night when security forces used water cannons and tear gas to disperse several thousands in central Beirut. And again today, security forces fired water cannon to disperse the protesters and prevent them from storming government buildings. Salam's government has suffered almost complete paralysis since it took office last year and faces further exasperation by the crisis in Syria. As the country continues to suffer a garbage disposal crisis, Salam said the trash is the straw that broke the camel's back, but the bigger story is the political garbage in the country.
Do you know that in the future we may not be able to finance our debts by issuing bonds, and this may lead to the country being classified as a failed country? Do you know that all these issues which I have sought to put on the cabinet list of decisions next week, if we do not make a decision on them, that would make things even worse and make the collapse more probable. Frankly, I will not be part of this collapse. Let each side and all political forces bear its responsibility and know the facts.
Over to Syria, where 11 people were killed and more than 50 injured in mortar attacks by rebels on Damascus Central Prison. Head of Damascus Central Prison branch, Nabil al-Ghajari, said many of the victims were women and children who came to visit their relatives. He said one of the mortars was dropped directly among the visitors, adding that most of the mortars came from Douma. Elsewhere, rockets and mortar hits other neighborhoods in the capital. The Syrian Interior Ministry and a police source said 5 mortar shells hit the prison and 3 mortars hit 3 residential houses in Al-Wafidin camp in Damascus countryside, injuring 3 others. Elsewhere in the country, at least 50 bodies were retrieved from buildings leveled to the ground after Syrian army missiles hit residential areas yesterday in the city of Douma, northeast of Damascus. A young girl was rescued from the rubble after spending the night trapped under her house, and according to the rescuers, her father and all her brothers died during the bombardment. The death toll was expected to rise as civil defense workers step up the search. The Observatory for Human Rights said the heavily populated part of the area where at least 250,000 civilians lived were probably hit by the ground-to-ground missiles. The latest casualties follow last Sunday's airstrike on a bustling marketplace in the same area which killed at least 100 people. The Syrian army denies it targets civilians areas and said it strikes a hideout of armed insurgents. Meanwhile, the United States and coalition partners targeted Daesh in 26 airstrikes in a round of daily attack on the terrorist group in Iraq and Syria. 17 of the strikes were in Iraq, with the greatest concentration near the city of Biji, Mosul, and Ramadi, where tactical units, buildings, fighting positions, weapons and vehicles were hit. These strikes also hit Daesh forces near 4 other Iraqi cities. In Syria, 8 attacks near the cities of Al-Hasakeh, Al-Hol, Al-Raqqa and Isa hit fighting positions, vehicles, tactical units as well as 4 bunkers. A 9th attack near Washiya had inconclusive results. Iran reopened its embassy in London, reciprocating the restoration of diplomatic ties hours after Britain reopened its embassy in Tehran. Iran's chargé d'affaires in London, Mohammed Hassan Habibullah Zadeh, and Deputy Foreign Minister Mehdi Danish Yazdi attended the event. Speaking at the event, Chairman of the UK All-Parliamentary Group on Iran, Richard Bacon, praised Iran as an important player in the Middle East, saying many of the problems with Syria and Iraq, as well as Daesh, would not be solved without the input of countries like Iran. Former British Foreign Minister Jack Straw, who was the last UK minister to visit Tehran in 2003, spoke of the importance of this diplomatic relationship, which dates back to the 19th century.
Relations have always been quite difficult, and they reached a further nadir in November 2011 with the invasion of our embassy in Tehran. But this is really good news. It's a good day, and of course it builds on the agreement which was made between the P5+1 and the Islamic Republic back in July.
On the other end, Britain reopens its embassy in Tehran in what is considered a historic step in the thawing of relations between Iran and Western powers. British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond attended the ceremony in Tehran with Iranian diplomats to mark the reopening. Both embassies will be run by chargé d'affaires at first, with ambassadors to be agreed within months. The first UK Foreign Secretary to visit Iran since 2003, Hammond declared the embassy open again, saying the two countries have to start slowly and carefully.
But the symbolic importance of deciding to reopen embassies in each other's countries is that we've chosen to talk to each other about those differences, to discuss them together, to look for areas where our interests do align, where we do agree about things, as we do with many countries around the world, work together in areas where we have a commonality of interest and continue to make our points in our regular dialogue in the areas where we do not agree. That's what diplomacy is all about.
Over to Yemen, where Al-Qaeda fighters took control of Tawahi, the western district of the main port city of Aden, in what is seen as the group is growing stronger since the start of the war. Residents in the area said scores of Al-Qaeda members have been patrolling the streets with their weapons in total freedom in a number of areas in Tawahi, where others have raised Al-Qaeda black flag above government buildings. The entrance of Al-Qaeda into Aden, considered once as one of the world's busiest ports, would be one of its biggest gains yet. The Italian Coast Guard released a video of rescue operations of thousands of migrants in the Mediterranean Sea over the course of the day. According to Italian authorities, some 4,400 migrants were rescued in around 22 operations carried out yesterday. Europe is struggling to cope with a record influx of migrants as they flee war in the Middle East and Africa. The Mediterranean has become the world's most deadly crossing point. Meanwhile, Macedonian authorities opened the Greek border for migrants. Here's more.
A steady stream of migrants are crossing into Macedonia from Greece. Many of them are refugees fleeing the Syrian civil war and other conflicts in the Middle East in the hopes of finding stability and peace elsewhere. But several days ago, they were met with stun grenades and tear gas as local security forces tried to stem their flow through the Balkans into Western Europe. On Sunday, riot police remained, but did little to slow the passage of hundreds of migrants. At the train station in Gefgelia, a small town located in the southeast of Macedonia, migrants were able to board trains to Serbia.
I feel better, coming from a war country and now I hope to live a good life and in a safe place. So I hope everything gets better. Let's see what happens.
Macedonia declared a state of emergency on Thursday and sealed its southern borders to migrants who poured in at a rate of 2,000 per day. It's accused neighboring Greece of aiding the migrants' journey north, at a pace the Balkan country says it cannot cope with.
Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko called on all political forces in the country to rally behind his plans for constitutional change aimed at ending the separatist conflict in the east. Poroshenko used a flag-raising ceremony in Kiev on the eve of Independence Day to make a clear pitch to his coalition allies to overcome their doubt and vote in favor of amendments to the constitution that will give special status to separatist-minded parts of eastern Ukraine. Several coalition allies are under pressure, particularly from militant paramilitary groups opposed to giving any ground to Russian-backed separatists who have seized swaths of land in the east. Young North Koreans are signing petitions to join or rejoin the army amid high tensions on the Korean peninsula. An estimated 1 million youth have signed the petitions after the North leader convened an emergency meeting following an exchange of fire by the two Koreas and a declaration of a quasi-state of war in frontline areas. Here's more.
State broadcaster KRT says 1 million people have put their names down to defend their country against South Korea.
The blood of the young generations are boiling with the spirit of protecting our nation.
A recent exchange of fire has brought the peninsula to the brink of armed conflict. South Korean media says the North has deployed twice the usual artillery on the front line, and most of its submarines are away from bases. On social media, some South Koreans posted photos of their army uniforms to say they're ready to fight. In Seoul, many people are worried about war breaking out.
I feel very nervous. My family is also getting ready. We are storing extra food, including instant noodles. I hope the meeting ends well and quickly, so that two Koreas can build a stable relationship.
At the demilitarized zone, top officials from both countries are holding talks in the hopes of easing tensions. North Korea wants the South to stop its anti-Pyongyang broadcasts, which started after 2 South Korean soldiers were wounded by landmines along the border. North Korea has denied responsibility.
Giant ancient granite statues of a pharaoh, king and queen, which were found in 2002 in the sunken Egyptian city of Thonis Heraklion, are on display in front of the Arab World Institute in Paris. These statues are conserved at the Marine Museum of Alexandria and were brought to Paris to be part of an exhibition opening in September and showcasing Egyptian artifacts found underwater. These statues date back from the 305 to 30 BC. The queen is 11.2 meters high and weighs 4 tons, while the pharaoh is 11.5 meters high and weighs 5.5 tons. The exhibition hosted by the Arab World Institute will feature 250 artifacts found underwater, as well as 43 objects from the Museum of Cairo and Alexandria, some of which are going to leave Egypt for the first time.
Statue of a pharaoh, we found it at the entrance of the Greek temple of Ammon in the city of Thonis Heraklion, which is now totally submerged. That statue is part of the exhibition because the celebration of the mysteries of Osiris were held in the temple of Ammon-Gereb, and that pharaoh was at the entrance of the temple.
We begin with tennis. Serena Williams was far from perfect but delivered when she had to in a 6-4, 6-3 win over Elena Svitolina to reach the final of the WTA Cincinnati Masters. The world #1 struggled with her serve for a second consecutive match and committed 34 unforced errors but moved one win away from defending her title. In the second set, two straight backhand winners allowed Williams to break the Ukrainian serve and move to 3-1. Williams will play third seed Simona Halep after she defeated Jelena Jankovic 6-1, 6-2 in the late match. Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton won the Belgian Grand Prix from pole position to stretch his lead over Mercedes teammate Nico Rosberg to 28 points with 8 races remaining. Rosberg finished 2 seconds behind the Briton in a dry race, despite teams anxiously studying weather maps for approaching rain in the final stages. Hamilton has now won 6 races this season and 39 in his Formula One career. The double champion has 227 points to Rosberg's 199, and today was also his 80th podium appearance. And finally, to the weather outlook. It remains pleasant in most regions for the rest of tonight and moderate in the Jordan Valley with northwesterly moderate winds. A slight drop in temperature is expected tomorrow, nearing their seasonal average. Normal summer conditions will prevail in hilly areas, but it will remain relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and the eastern plains, with northwesterly fresh winds turning dusty in the southern and eastern regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect hot conditions with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly high seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end the news, here's a recap of our top stories. The Lebanese Prime Minister threatens to resign, warning rival parties in his unity cabinet that the state is going towards collapse and calls on them to stand up their responsibilities. Iran and Britain reciprocate the restoration of diplomatic ties with the reopening of the British Embassy in Tehran and the Iranian Embassy in London at the chargé d'affaires level. And 1 million North Koreans signed petitions to join or rejoin the army after the two Koreas exchanged fire and declare a quasi-state of war in frontline areas. And with this we come to an end. I'm Farah Ajlouni. Thank you for watching and have a good night.